The first thing Commander Mithra noticed was the smell. Stasis pods had a certain aroma, stale sweat and regret mixed with the tang of recycled air. She grimaced as the pod opened, the hydraulics screeching like a banshee with a hangover, like she needed a headache on top of waking up from a centuries-long nap. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty," she muttered to herself, blinking into the harsh light of the Vigilant's cryo bay. Around her, the rest of the crew stirred, groggy and disoriented. Groaning echoed like a choir of miserable souls, each member pulling themselves from the embrace of artificial slumber. Sergeant Dreyfus was the first to speak, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Well, if that's not the worst sleep I've ever had, I don't know what is." Mithra stumbled out of her pod, steadying herself against the cool metal side. "Welcome to the future, folks. Let's see what mess we've gotten ourselves into this time." The ancient AI scribe flickered to life on the nearest console, its voice smooth and clinical, like a schoolteacher that had seen it all. "Good morning, Commander. I trust your slumber was restorative." She shot a skeptical glance at the console. "Restorative? My back feels like it's been used as a punching bag by a pissed-off orangutan. What year is it anyway, scribe?" "According to our records, it's been approximately 300 years since you entered stasis," the AI responded, ever so chipper. 300 years? Bloody hell," Dreyfus grunted, rubbing his temples. "I can't even imagine the wrinkles." Mithra chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "You know what they say, Dreyfus, age before beauty, though in your case beauty might be a bit generous." "All right, scribe, give us the bad news," Lieutenant Arden called out, stretching her arms with a series of satisfying pops. "What's the galaxy like these days? Any new songs?" "Politics more civil," scribe hesitated, as if searching for the right words to deliver a punchline. "The galaxy as it stands is dominated by the Zorath Collective." "Zorath Collective? Sounds like a bad band name," Dreyfus scoffed, checking his sidearm more out of habit than necessity. "They are an alien empire," scribe continued, unperturbed by the sarcasm. "They control vast swaths of the star systems, including this sector." Mithra ran a hand through her hair, feeling the knots from stasis. "So, we're the unexpected guests at a party we weren't invited to. Lovely." Arden leaned against the console, eyeing the AI flickering avatar. "And what do they think of humans?" "Historically, the Zorath view humans as lesser beings," scribe replied, not missing a beat. "Fantastic. We're the cockroaches of the universe," Arden said dryly. "Always a pleasure to be underestimated." Dreyfus cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing ominously in the sterile bay. "So what now, Commander? We take a swing at the big boys, or do we tuck tail and find a nice quiet asteroid to hide under?" Mithra sighed, glancing at the motley crew that had become her family over countless years and countless battles. She'd faced worse odds before, though maybe not quite this bad. "I say we do what humans do best, cause a bit of chaos, make some noise." "And if that doesn't work?" Arden asked, a hint of a smirk on her lips. Mithra shrugged, a wicked twinkle in her eyes. "Then we steal their booze and set their backyard on fire." "Ah, diplomacy," Dreyfus chimed in, mockingly raising an imaginary glass. "To subtlety and tact." "All right, team." Mithra clapped her hands, snapping them back to attention. "Let's get to the bridge and see if this tub still floats." Her crew wouldn't win any beauty contests or tickle fights, but they were hers, and that was enough. The journey to the bridge was a somber procession through hallways that had seen better days. Panels hung loose, and the occasional spark showered down like a particularly vindictive rainstorm. Clearly, 300 years had been hell on maintenance. "Remind me to fire the janitorial staff," Mithra grumbled, sidestepping a loose cable. "I think they quit about 2 centuries ago," Arden quipped. They reached the bridge, a spacious room filled with consoles and chairs that groaned in protest at any weight. Mithra took her place at the captain's chair, the faux leather cracking under her as if to remind her of its age. "Scribe, power up the systems," she ordered, half expecting the AI to crack a joke about geriatric machinery. The screens flickered to life, a symphony of light and sound that was both unsettling and comforting in its familiarity. All systems nominal, Commander, Scribe reported. Dreyfus settled into his seat, fingers dancing over the controls. Looks like the engine's still purring, though I wouldn't take it out for a joyride just yet. Arden scanned the surrounding space through the main display, eyes narrowing as she took in the sight. Well, would you look at that? We've got company. A trio of ships hovered nearby, sleek and ominous, like predators circling a wounded animal. Zorath Patrol, Scribe confirmed, almost cheerfully. Mithra leaned back in her chair, considering their options or lack thereof. Okay, folks, I guess it's time to introduce ourselves. And I didn't even bring flowers, Dreyfus added, shaking his head with feigned disappointment. What do you think they want? Arden asked, though the answer seemed self-evident. To tell us to bugger off, probably, Mithra replied. Or see if we're easy pickings. Charming neighbors, Arden commented, adjusting the display to focus on their would-be adversaries. Mithra straightened her uniform, brushing off imaginary dust. Let's show them what 300 years of human evolution looks like. They are in for a treat, Dreyfus muttered, rolling his eyes. Scribe, open a channel, Mithra ordered. The AI complied, the comms crackling to life with a hiss akin to an angry snake. Channel open, Commander. This is Commander Mithra of the human vessel Vigilant, she announced, her voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. We woke up on the wrong side of the galaxy, so mind telling us what the hell's going on? There was a pause, long enough for tension to coil around the bridge like a constrictor. Then a voice, smooth and disdainful, cut through the speakers. This is Captain Zaver of the Zorath Collective. You are an unauthorized presence in our territory. Oh, really? Mithra replied, feigning surprise. And here I thought we were just dropping by for tea. Zaver's voice carried the weight of someone who had forgotten how to smile. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Well, isn't that a warm welcome? Dreyfus muttered, simultaneously powering up those very weapons. Tell me, Captain Zaver, Mithra said, leaning forward with a devil-may-care grin. You always treat new friends like this, or are we just special? Compliance is your only option, Zaver replied, ignoring the jab. Your vessel is technically archaic. Technically, yes, but don't underestimate the classics, Mithra warned. Arden shot her a look, eyebrows raised in what could only be described as amused disbelief. You're gonna bluff a Zorath patrol with a ship old enough to have its own pension. Bluff, Mithra chuckled, the sound a low, dangerous hum. I prefer to think of it as creative negotiation. The Zorath ships edged closer, their intent clear. But Mithra, well, she had a few tricks left up her sleeve. Dreyfus, are you thinking what I'm thinking? If you mean let's make them work for it, then yes, he replied, grin matching her own. Scribe, Mithra said, eyes gleaming with a spark of mischief. How do you feel about giving these Zorath a run for their money? For a moment, the AI paused. Then, in a rare show of humor, replied, I am programmed to serve, Commander. All right, team, Mithra said, rising from her chair with the kind of confidence that came only from being utterly outgunned. Let's remind these aliens why humans are the galaxy's worst house guests. As the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity, plans were made and options weighed. The Zorath were coming, and the Vigilant's crew intended to meet them with open arms and full magazines. Mithra stared at the display, the enemy ships growing larger by the second. Here we go, she murmured, feeling a thrill of anticipation as the gap closed. Let's see if these bugs can handle a little human ingenuity. The Vigilant stirred to life, engines roaring defiantly in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the Zorath ships loomed, Mithra couldn't help but grin. After all, what's the point of waking up if you can't shake things up a bit? The Vigilant's engines grumbled like an old man with arthritis, but they were awake, and in this galaxy, that was half the battle. As the ship lurched forward, dodging the Zorath patrols with a dance that was more drunken stumble than graceful waltz, Mithra kept her eyes on the mission. This wasn't about finesse, it was about survival. Anything on the scanners? Mithra asked, her voice carrying an edge of urgency sharpened by 3 centuries of sleep. Arden, perched at her console like a hawk with a caffeine addiction, squinted at the flickering screens. Well, we've got something that looks like a solar farm up ahead, or maybe it's a giant disco ball. Hard to tell from this angle. Let's hope it's the former, Mithra replied dryly. Though I suppose a disco ball might distract them for a few minutes. Dreyfus chuckled, his gravelly voice like crushed stones. Nothing like some classic human nonsense to throw them off their game. As the Vigilant drew closer, the solar farm resolved into view, an expansive grid of mirrored panels stretching across the dark void like a net designed to catch photons. It might have been beautiful once, but now it was just another relic in a universe that had forgotten them. Looks like it's been repurposed, Arden noted, leaning closer to the screen. The Zorath have done some redecorating. Bloody typical, Mithra muttered. Can't leave anything untouched, can they? Scribe chimed in, its voice cutting through the tension with the efficiency of a guillotine. Analysis indicates the solar farm has been modified to function as a large-scale superlaser. A superlaser, Dreyfus let out a low whistle. That's a bit overkill for a light show. Means we're sitting on a powder keg, Mithra said, her mind already whirring with possibilities. If we can get control of it, we might just have a stick big enough to poke the Zorath right in their collective eye. Arden shot her a skeptical glance. And if they decide to hit back with, their actual fleet, then we better make sure our first shot counts, Mithra replied, her voice steady despite the odds stacked against them. Scribe, can you access the solar farm remotely? The AI hesitated, as if weighing the wisdom of sharing bad news with an already on-edge crew. Remote access is possible, but limited. The system's core controls are likely housed in the central hub. Translation, we need to take a stroll in zero-G, Dreyfus concluded, already unstrapping himself from the console. Mithra nodded, her expression one of resigned determination. Gear up, team. We're going to take a little walk. As the crew suited up in the cramped confines of the airlock, the mood was tense but tinged with dark humor. If you couldn't laugh at the absurdity, you'd end up crying, and that was a waste of perfectly good oxygen. 300 years and we're still breaking and entering, Dreyfus grumbled, checking the seals on his helmet. Some things never change. At least we're consistent, Arden replied, her voice muffled through the suit's comms. No one else I'd rather be committing space burglary with. Mithra struggled into her own suit with all the grace of a cat in a bathtub. Let's just hope this old girl doesn't blow a gasket halfway through. And if she does, Arden asked, fastening the last of her straps. Then we improvise, Mithra said, as if that was the only option, because frankly it was. Exiting the Vigilant was like stepping into the maw of a great beast, the void swallowing them in an embrace as cold as it was unforgiving. The solar farm loomed ahead, a patchwork of shimmering panels that reflected the distant starlight with a disorienting brilliance. Nice place they've got here, Dreyfus remarked, pushing off towards the farm with practiced ease. I wonder if they give tours. Only if you don't mind the tour guide being heavily armed, Arden muttered, following suit. Mithra adjusted her trajectory, her movements fluid despite the bulky suit. Let's find that control hub and see if we can't make some fireworks. They drifted towards the central structure, a hulking mass of machinery that bore all the hallmarks of Zorath design, sharp edges, functional ugliness, and a general disregard for aesthetics. If the Zorath had a motto, Mithra mused, it would probably be efficiency over everything. Watch your step, Dreyfus cautioned as they landed, his boots clanging against the metal surface. Wouldn't want to set off any alarms. Or explode, Arden added, her eyes scanning the area for any hidden surprises. The control hub was protected by a bulkhead door that looked like it could withstand a meteor strike. Mithra studied it with the eye of someone who'd broken into more than her fair share of secure locations. Scribe, any tips on cracking this thing open? She asked, half expecting the AI to suggest a battering ram. The control mechanisms are accessible via a manual override located at the panel's base, Scribe responded helpfully. Mithra crouched down, her fingers tracing the edges of the panel. Manual override, huh? Just like in the good old days. Good old days, Dreyfus snorted. When were those exactly? Ignoring the sarcasm, Mithra pried the panel open, exposing a tangle of wires and circuits that looked like something a toddler might concoct with a box of crayons and a loose grip on reality. "Anyone bring a wiring diagram?" Arden joked, peering over Mithra's shoulder. Mithra's fingers danced over the circuits with the familiarity of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "No diagram, but I did stay at a space station motel last night." "Try not to fry us," Dreyfus said, though there was no real concern in his voice. He trusted her, and in this business, that was worth more than any wiring manual. After a few tense moments, there was a satisfying click, and the bulkhead door shuddered open with a groan that seemed to echo in the depths of space. "Let's see what the Zorath have left us," Mithra said, stepping into the control hub. The room was a claustrophobic labyrinth of terminals and screens, the air stagnant with the unmistakable scent of ozone and neglect. Mithra approached the main console, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust, proof that not even the Zorath had managed to keep their desk tidy. "Scribe, interface with the system," she instructed, hoping the AI could make sense of whatever alien gibberish was about to assault their senses. The screens flickered to life, displaying a dizzying array of symbols and diagrams that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphs. Scribe's presence manifested as a calm, pulsating icon on the central display. "Accessing system architecture," Scribe announced, its virtual fingers delving into the digital guts of the superlaser. "How long's this gonna take?" Arden asked, her patience wearing thin. "Approximately 3 minutes," Scribe replied, as though it could taste the skepticism in the air. 3 minutes, Dreyfus repeated, casting a nervous glance back towards the Vigilant. "That's about 2.5 more than we probably have." Outside, the Zorath patrols were still circling, their sensors undoubtedly picking up on the unwanted activity. The Vigilant might have been a relic, but it was a stubborn one, and the Zorath weren't likely to appreciate its dogged refusal to be ignored. Mithra glanced at the display, willing Scribe to work faster. Come on," she muttered, as if impatience could turn seconds into milliseconds. "System access achieved," Scribe declared, its voice as calm as a monk at a meditation retreat. "Finally," Arden breathed, relief evident in her tone. "Can we use this thing or what?" "Weapon Systems Online, Commander," Scribe confirmed. "The superlaser is at your command." Mithra's grin was a feral thing. "Now that's what I like to hear." "Just remember," Dreyfus cautioned, "we don't have unlimited shots. Make it count." Mithra nodded, her gaze fixed on the display as she plotted their next move. The Zorath ships were closing in, their silhouettes ominous against the backdrop of stars. "Time to give them a warm welcome," Mithra said, her fingers dancing over the controls with a precision born of necessity. The superlaser hummed to life, the solar panels shifting and aligning with a grace that belied their age. Energy coursed through the conduits, charging the weapon with a power that was both thrilling and terrifying. "All right, team," Mithra said, her voice steady as she prepared to unleash hell. "Let's show these Zorath the real meaning of human ingenuity." The laser fired, a blinding beam of light that cut through the void with a lethal elegance. One of the Zorath ships caught the full brunt of the blast, its hull disintegrating in a spectacular display of pyrotechnics. "Direct hit," Scribe reported, almost sounding impressed. "Hell yeah," Arden cheered, her fist punching the air in triumph. "That's what I'm talking about," Dreyfus let out a bark of laughter. "They won't be forgetting that anytime soon." But the celebration was short-lived. The remaining Zorath ships regrouped, their movements precise and coordinated as they prepared to retaliate. "Here they come," Mithra warned, her fingers poised over the controls. "Brace yourselves." The Zorath opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness with a deadly precision that spoke of countless battles fought and won. The Vigilant rocked under the assault, its shield straining to hold back the tide. "Dreyfus, give me some good news," Mithra shouted, the console sparking dangerously. Shields are holding, but not for long, he replied, his hands flying over the controls with a speed that spoke of experience. We need to hit them again before they regroup, Arden urged, her eyes fixed on the display. Scribe, can we fire again? Mithra asked, her voice tinged with urgency. The superlaser requires recharging, Scribe informed them, its tone maddeningly calm. How long? Mithra demanded, knowing the answer would likely be too long. Approximately 1 minute, Scribe replied. 1 minute, Mithra repeated, her voice a mixture of disbelief and determination. We don't have a minute. The Zorath ships continued their assault, their weapons hammering at the Vigilant with a relentless fury. Come on, you old girl, Mithra whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Hold together just a little longer. As the seconds ticked by, the Vigilant shuddered under the onslaught, but it held. Somehow, against all odds, it held. The superlaser is ready, Scribe announced, a momentary reprieve in the storm of violence. Mithra's grin was a fierce thing, a testament to defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Good. Let's give them another taste of human ingenuity. With a deftness that spoke of desperation and hope, Mithra fired the superlaser once more. The beam lanced out, striking true and reducing another Zorath ship to a cloud of debris. Another one bites the dust, Dreyfus crowed, his voice triumphant. 2 down, 1 to go, Arden said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and adrenaline. But the remaining Zorath ship was no fool. It broke off, retreating into the depths of space with a speed that spoke of self-preservation. Looks like they've had enough, Mithra observed, watching the ship disappear from view. For now, Dreyfus agreed, a note of caution in his tone. Mithra exhaled, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. Let's get back to the Vigilant. We've got work to do. As they made their way back, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. They'd survived the first round, but the fight was far from over. The galaxy was a big place, and the Zorath weren't known for their forgiving nature. But for now, they had a weapon, a blade to wield in the dark, and maybe, just maybe, the element of surprise. Back aboard the Vigilant, Mithra shed her suit, her body aching but her spirit undaunted. She gathered her crew, their faces weary yet determined. We've won this round, Mithra said, her voice carrying the weight of command. But we need to be ready for whatever comes next. And what comes next? Arden asked, though she already knew the answer. War, Mithra replied, her eyes glittering with a fierce resolve. And we're going to make damn sure the galaxy remembers us. With that, they set about their preparations. Mithra's boots clanged against the metal floor of the Vigilant's control room, echoing with every step like the tolling of a funeral bell. The only problem was, this ship had more rust than a graveyard, and its systems were about as cooperative as a cat in a bathtub. Right, let's see how much more this hunk of junk can take, Mithra muttered, plopping herself down in the captain's chair with the grace of a tired sloth. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest, a metronome to the impending chaos. Dreyfus, with his gravelly voice that could sand wood, leaned over the console, his aged joints popping audibly. You know, if this thing were any older, we'd be digging for spare parts in a museum, or an archaeological dig for that matter. Thanks for the optimism, Mithra said dryly. Remind me to put you in charge of morale next time. Sure, I'll bring the balloons and confetti, Dreyfus retorted, a sardonic grin stretching across his weathered face. And maybe a hearse just in case. Lieutenant Arden scrutinized the display, her eyes sharp and focused, like a hawk sizing up its prey. Scribe, what's next on our how to not die checklist? Current objective. Fully operationalize the superlaser, Scribe replied, its voice as flat as the console it lived in. Operationalize. Sounds like someone swallowed a thesaurus, Mithra muttered as she scratched her head. Arden tapped away at her console, her fingers a blur of urgency. Okay, so we've got a superlaser that can fire once every blue moon. How about we make that a bit more frequent? You know, like maybe once a week. Good luck with that, Dreyfus snorted. This thing's recharge rate is slower than a snail on sedatives. Mithra leaned back, surveying the clutter of terminals like a general sizing up a battlefield. Let's get those panels aligned. Maybe the Zorath left some of their smarts behind. Or their idiocy, Arden quipped, her eyes narrowing at a tangle of wires that couldn't decide if they wanted to be connected or combust. Seriously, who designs these things? Someone with a grudge against engineers, I'd wager, Dreyfus chuckled. Probably got tired of tech manuals and decided to make a puzzle box instead. Jigsaw puzzles are for rainy days, Mithra shot back, not for keeping our butts alive. As the crew labored over the controls, the Vigilant shuddered as if offended by the idea of working properly. Alarms blared, the red lights painting everything in shades of impending doom. Manual override systems are responding, Scribe announced, its tone as lively and passionate as a tax document. Initiating primary sequence. Primary sequence? Dreyfus asked, raising an eyebrow. That sounds like the start of a bad movie. Yeah, the kind where everyone dies, Arden added, throwing a glance at Mithra, who was busily engaged in the ancient art of swearing at electronics. All right, here we go, Mithra said, pressing a series of buttons that could have been hieroglyphics for all the sense they made. Let's make some magic happen. The ship's superlaser hummed to life, the vibrations running through the deck like an electric pulse. Energy surged, dancing across the panels in a light show that would have made any fireworks display look like a matchstick in the wind. Power levels are stabilizing, Scribe reported, a slight hint of surprise in its voice. Or maybe it was just indigestion after being asleep for centuries. Good, now let's avoid turning ourselves into cosmic confetti, Mithra said, her voice tinged with equal parts excitement and dread. The screens lit up with Zorath patrols converging on their position, their sleek ships cutting through space like predatory shadows. The odds weren't great, but they'd had worse hands before. Incoming, Arden warned, her voice a tightrope between tension and resolve. Wonderful. Just what we need. More uninvited guests, Dreyfus grumbled. Hope they brought snacks. Mithra's grin was a feral thing, a challenge spat into the face of the universe. Let's see if they like surprises. The superlaser unleashed its fury, a bolt of wrath that streaked through the void, reducing a Zorath ship to atoms in an instant. The display lit up with the aftermath, pieces of debris floating aimlessly. One down, Mithra said, her fingers dancing over the controls like a maestro conducting an orchestra of chaos. Another happy customer, Dreyfus chimed in, his voice a mix of relief and amusement. The remaining Zorath ships weren't about to let that slide. They zeroed in, their weapons blazing a path of vengeance across the stars. The Vigilant shuddered under the relentless barrage, its shields buckling under the strain. Their turn, Arden quipped, her eyes never leaving the console. Would have been nice if they'd given us a chance to reload. Shields are at 30%, Scribe announced, its voice a bastion of calm amidst the storm. You hear that, folks? Mithra said, her tone a mockery of a tour guide. We're just one more good hit away from being a cautionary tale. The Zorath advanced, a predator's patience in their movements. The Vigilant was a cornered beast, and everyone on board knew it. Come on, Mithra urged, her voice a mantra against the odds. We need that charge yesterday. Relax, Dreyfus said, ever the master of terrible timing. Worst case, we become famous. Posthumously, of course. Comforting, Arden replied with a grim chuckle. Maybe we'll get a holiday named after us. Mithra's focus was unyielding, every part of her being willing the ship to hold just a little longer. The vibrating hum of the superlaser reached a crescendo, raw energy crackling like a storm in a bottle. Ready to fire, Scribe announced, and for once its monotonous tone was music to their ears. Let's see if they appreciate our fireworks, Mithra said, her grin a fierce spark in the face of despair. The superlaser fired again, another blinding lance of destruction that sliced through space and found its mark. Another Zorath ship vanished in a searing burst of light, leaving nothing but echoes and ghosts. Down to one, Arden called, her voice a mix of disbelief and elation. But the Zorath commander had seen enough. The final ship veered away, retreating into the abyss with haste that belied its earlier bravado. Some ships have all the sense. Looks like they didn't want to stay for dessert, Dreyfus remarked, his voice laced with a satisfaction that hadn't been present a moment before. Can't blame them, Mithra said, her fingers finally stilling, the tension bleeding out of her body. Our cooking isn't for everyone. As the dust settled and the silence returned, Mithra wiped a hand across her brow, her mind already racing ahead. They'd won a battle, sure, but this war was just getting started. And if there was one thing Mithra knew how to do, it was fight. Let's get to work, people, she ordered, her voice firm and unyielding. That was just the warm-up. The crew dispersed, each member returning to their stations, their faces lined with fatigue but lit by the fire of determination. They were alone in the dark, a solitary candle against a raging storm, but they would not be extinguished. Arden lingered, her eyes meeting Mithra's as the weight of their circumstances settled over them like a leaden cloak. "What's next on the agenda, Commander?" "Survive," Mithra replied, her voice a soldier's oath, "and keep giving the galaxy a reason to remember us." Outside the ship, the stars wheeled on, indifferent to the struggles of those who sailed among them. But for the crew of the Vigilant, they'd carved their names into the darkness, and they had no intention of fading into obscurity. As they began the process of repairs and rearming, Dreyfus couldn't resist one last jab. "So, lunch break or do we skip straight to dinner?" "Think I'll pass," Mithra said with a wry smile. "I hear space rations taste like despair sprinkled with regret." "And a hint of cardboard," Arden added, her laughter a bright note in the heavy air. Together they laughed, the sound carrying through the corridors of the Vigilant, a defiant melody against the silence of the cosmos. The Vigilant drifted through the void, a spacefaring relic held together by duct tape, sheer stubbornness, and the questionable engineering of a bygone era. Inside, the crew was busy licking their wounds, both physical and emotional, after their recent bout with the Zorath. "Well, I guess that went better than expected," Dreyfus grumbled, rubbing his shoulder as if he'd been personally slugged by every Zorath ship in that skirmish. "By which I mean, we're not space dust." "Always the optimist, Dreyfus," Mithra said, trying to massage the tension out of her temples with fingers that felt like they'd been wired to a live circuit. "Next time I'll just ask them to stand still while we shoot." Arden was perched at her console, tapping away like a caffeinated spider weaving a web of doom. "Scribe, give me a status update before Dreyfus starts planning his retirement." "All systems operational," Scribe intoned with all the enthusiasm of a dead fish. "Superlaser recharging. Shields at 50%. Engines still functioning." "Define functioning," Mithra challenged, leveling a glare at the nearest speaker, as if the AI could be intimidated into seeing things her way. "Engines are operational but experiencing suboptimal performance," Scribe clarified in its typical monotone which seemed to contain the barest hint of judgment. Translation: "They're as tired as you look." "Perfect," Mithra sighed. "We're a flying junkyard with bad timing." "Speaking of junk," Arden interjected, her eyes glued to the console, "I'm picking up something weird in the comms channel. A signal, maybe." "Great," Dreyfus said, leaning back with a groan that was equal parts chair and creaky joints. "Just what we need. A cosmic telemarketer trying to sell us extended warranties on engines that'll probably explode first chance they get." "Patch it through, Arden," Mithra instructed, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "Let's see if it's a coupon for a new superlaser." Arden's fingers flew across the keys, and the bridge speakers crackled to life with a sound that was halfway between static and a strangled cat. After a moment, a voice emerged, rough and tinny from centuries-old equipment. "This is the free resistance," the voice declared, each word a struggle against the interference. "To those who oppose the Zorath, we offer an alliance. Together we can take back what is ours." "The free resistance," Dreyfus repeated, his eyebrows climbing up his forehead as if trying to escape. "Did I miss the memo on the intergalactic revolution?" "Sounds like the name of a band that didn't make it past their first album," Mithra muttered, but her mind was already turning, weighing the possibilities, the risks, the slim chance of hope. Arden leaned forward, frowning at the data streaming across her screen. Signals coming from the outer edge of the sector. Looks like they're not far from the old solar farm. The one we just used to paint the Zorath a new definition of regret, Dreyfus asked, his tone as dry as a desert bone. The very same, Arden confirmed, glancing at Mithra with an unspoken question in her eyes. Mithra sat back, chewing on her lip and the decision hanging in the air like a bad smell. An alliance could mean backup, new resources, maybe even a chance to start pushing back against the Zorath. But it could also be a trap, or worse, a group of well-intentioned idiots who'd get them all killed. "So, Commander," Dreyfus said, breaking the silence, "do we answer the call to arms, or do we keep pretending we're the galaxy's most exclusive club?" "More like the galaxy's most stubborn cockroach," Mithra replied. But the decision was there, bubbling beneath the surface like a dormant volcano just waiting for a reason to blow. "We're going to find out if this free resistance is the real deal or just another headache." "And if it's the latter?" Arden asked, her eyes meeting Mithra's, sharp and calculating. "Then we'll do what we always do," Mithra said with a grim smile. "Make a mess, blow things up, and hope we're still around to clean it up." Dreyfus grinned, a lopsided thing that was all teeth and no promises. "Sounds like a plan. Messy, suicidal, and right up our alley." With a nod, Mithra set the course, the Vigilant creaking in protest as if it could sense the folly of this mission. "Scribe, log this in the ship's records. If we go down in flames, I want them to know we did it with style." "Affirmative," Scribe replied, its tone as unruffled as ever. "Logging entry. Captain Mithra and crew decide on potentially catastrophic course of action." "Again? Great. Now even the AI is judging us," Dreyfus said, shaking his head. "What a time to be alive." "Alive being the operative word," Mithra shot back, her hand steady on the controls as the stars blurred into lines, the ship picking up speed like an arthritic tortoise on a caffeine binge. As they closed in on the source of the signal, Arden kept up a running commentary, her voice a lifeline that tethered the crew to the reality outside. "I'm picking up some structures. Looks like a base of sorts. No signs of Zorath activity, but that could change." "If it's a trap," Dreyfus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I volunteer Arden to spring it." "Thanks, Dreyfus," Arden replied dryly, not even bothering to glance up from her console. "I'll be sure to bring you back a souvenir." "Enough bickering," Mithra ordered, though there was no real heat in her words. It was routine by now, a comforting ritual that kept them grounded even in the face of the unknown. As the Vigilant dropped out of hyperspace, the viewports filled with the sight of the solar farm, an array of mirrors gleaming with an eerie beauty, reflecting nothing but cold starlight. Nestled amidst the panels was a cluster of ships, mismatched and battered, but brimming with a strange kind of purpose. "Welcome committee doesn't look too hostile," Arden observed, her fingers dancing over the sensors. "Guess that's a good sign." "For now," Mithra agreed, though her hand hovered near the weapons console, ready to unleash hell if things went south. A hail crackled through the speakers, clearer this time. "Vigilant, this is the Free Resistance. We recognize your signal. Please state your intentions." Mithra leaned forward, her voice steady and sure. "This is Commander Mithra of the Vigilant. We're here to answer your call. We've had a common enemy for a long time, and maybe it's time we started doing something about it." Silence stretched, a taut wire of suspense that threatened to snap at any moment. Then finally the response came, a welcome relief wrapped in uncertainty. "Understood, Commander. Prepare to dock for the meeting. Let's see if we can't make the Zorath's lives a little more complicated." "I like them already," Dreyfus said, cracking his knuckles as if preparing for a fight that was inevitable. "Let's just make sure we're the ones complicating things," Arden added, casting a wary eye at the incoming docking clamps. Mithra nodded, a slow grin spreading across her face. "All right, people. Let's go see if they've got what it takes to join the party." The docking process was a study in antiquated technology and sheer perseverance. the ships aligning with all the grace of drunken dancers at a wedding. As the Vigilant settled into place, Mithra couldn't help but feel a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time. Hope, fragile and new, like a green shoot pushing through cracked pavement. The airlock cycled open, and the crew stepped out, greeted by a ragtag assembly of individuals who looked every bit as worn as the Vigilant itself. Leading them was a tall figure with a face that had seen too many battles and not enough victories. "Commander Mithra," the leader asked, extending a hand that was calloused but steady. "That's me," Mithra replied, shaking the offered hand with a grip that spoke of hard choices and harder will. "And you are Koron, leader of this little band of rebels," he replied, a wry smile touching his lips. "We've heard tales of the Vigilant and its crew. Glad to see you're more than just stories." "Stories tend to leave out the smell," Dreyfus quipped, earning a few chuckles from the gathered crowd. Koron gestured towards a makeshift meeting area, cluttered with maps and data pads. "Please join us. We've got much to discuss if we're to make a dent in the Zorath's plans." Mithra followed, her crew at her heels, the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders. This was it, a chance to strike back, to be more than survivors, to become the spark that might just ignite a larger blaze. "So, what's the plan?" Arden asked, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces that could soon be allies or another footnote in a doomed resistance. "First," Koron replied, leaning over the table where a holographic map flickered to life, "we need to take out a Zorath listening post. They've been intercepting our communications. If we can shut it down, it'll give us some breathing room." "Sounds straightforward enough," Mithra said, eyeing the map with a strategist's focus. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Koron replied with a grimace, "is that it's heavily guarded and they've got defenses that'll make your teeth sweat." "Lovely," Dreyfus muttered, crossing his arms. "I knew this was too good to be true." Mithra smirked, undeterred. "Well, Koron, if you're looking for crazy, you've found it. We've got a superlaser that's itching for more action, and I'm sure we can find a way to put it to good use." Koron's smile widened, respect mingling with a hint of admiration. "Then we may just stand a chance. Welcome to the Resistance, Commander Mithra. Let's make those Zorath bastards wish they'd never heard of us." As plans were laid and strategies devised, Mithra felt a shift in the air, a change in the currents of fate. The fight ahead would be brutal, costly, and full of more dangers than she could count. But they weren't alone anymore. In this small, defiant corner of the galaxy, they were making a stand. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Vigilant groaned like a geriatric on a bad day, its engine struggling as it limped away from the solar farm's embrace. The crew had barely made it back on board, the meeting with Koron turning out to be about as welcoming as a punch to the gut. The trap had sprung with the elegance of a sledgehammer, and now they were nursing their wounds, physical and otherwise. Dreyfus was nursing a busted arm, his usual sarcastic edge more pronounced as he spat. Well, that went about as well as a fart in a spacesuit. Mithra, leaning against the console with an ice pack pressed to a rapidly swelling bruise on her cheek, couldn't muster the energy to offer a retort. The promise of an alliance had turned into a baptism of fire, the Zorath springing the trap with all the subtlety of a hungry apex predator. "Engines are toast," Arden reported, her voice steady despite the chaos she'd just survived. "We're running on fumes and crossed fingers. 50% shields, engines that can barely move us faster than a drunk slug, and a superlaser that's about as useful as a wet paper towel," Mithra summarized with a grimace. "Oh, and let's not forget we're down half the crew." The loss hung in the air like the aftermath of a bad joke, sour and lingering. The trap had cost them dearly, the Resistance's supposed allies nowhere to be found when the Zorath ships descended like vultures. They'd fought their way out by the skin of their teeth, but victory felt hollow. Who knew intergalactic resistance would be so welcoming? Dreyfus added, the bite of his words undercut by the pain etched on his face. "You think Koron has a return policy on betrayal?" Arden let out a breath, staring at the flickering console screen. "We're not dead yet, that's something." "Yeah," Mithra agreed, though the word tasted bitter. "We're not dead, just mostly screwed." Scribe, ever the optimist in its monotone way, chimed in. "Survival probability has decreased but remains above zero. Suggest immediate repairs and reassessment of strategic assets." "Thanks, Scribe," Mithra said with a dry laugh. "I feel better already." The control room was a mess of sparking panels and disheveled wires, a testament to their recent firefight. The crew that remained was patching up what they could with supplies that would have made a scavenger weep. "We've got enough duct tape to hold things together," Arden said, her voice a mix of determination and resignation. "Barely. Duct tape, the unsung hero of the universe," Dreyfus quipped, though his heart wasn't in it. "Right up there with stubbornness and blind luck." "Blind luck's about all we've got left," Mithra conceded, staring out the viewport at the passing starlight, each point of light a distant dream of sanctuary. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy, until Dreyfus broke it with a sigh. "So what's the plan, Commander?" "You know, after we finish not dying, first we lick our wounds," Mithra said, the weight of leadership a constant pressure. "Then we figure out who's left in this galaxy that doesn't want to kill us." Arden shook her head, pulling up a map on the screen with a flick of her fingers. "Options are slim, Commander. Most of the sector's crawling with Zorath patrols, and we're not exactly flying under the radar with half our systems shot to hell." "Yeah," Mithra said, rubbing the bridge of her nose in frustration. "We're about as subtle as a space elephant in a china shop right now. Maybe we can use that to our advantage," Dreyfus suggested, a gleam of mischief breaking through the gloom. "Play dead, let 'em think they got us. Then when they least expect it, hit 'em where it hurts," Mithra finished, a smile ghosting across her lips despite herself. "It was a long shot, but that was their bread and butter." "Great," Arden cut in, "except for the minor issue of them not falling for the same trick twice." "Point," Mithra admitted. "But maybe we can improvise. We've got a knack for that." "And if things go sideways?" Dreyfus asked, though the answer was already in the air, too clear to ignore. "Then we go down swinging," Mithra said, the words a promise more than a plan. "We've got nothing left to lose." "Except our lives," Dreyfus added with a sardonic grin. "But who's counting?" The ship lurched, a reminder of its fragile state, and Mithra steadied herself against the console, determination hardening her features. "Scribe, what's the status on that superlaser?" "Recharging is at 30% capacity," the AI responded, indifferent to their plight. "Estimated time to readiness, 6 hours." 6 hours, Mithra echoed, her mind racing. "That's 6 hours to patch what we can and hope for a miracle." "Hope," Dreyfus snorted. "Might as well wish for a pony while we're at it." "Hey, I'd settle for a space pony right about now," Arden said, her own attempt at humor a thin veneer over the reality they faced. The crew set to work, patching, arguing, and somehow finding the strength to keep moving. There was a grim camaraderie in the air, an understanding that came from fighting the odds and each other, just to keep breathing. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the ship slowly coming back to something resembling life. Mithra found herself in the engine room, Arden at her side, both of them staring at the smoking remains of what once passed for advanced technology. "Think it'll hold?" Mithra asked, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a grimy hand. Arden shrugged, her expression one of grim acceptance. "Probably not, but it's better than sitting here waiting for the end." Mithra nodded, feeling a strange kinship with the battered hulk of their ship. "We've made it this far, haven't we? Might as well push our luck." "Luck," Arden repeated, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "The universe's best running joke." The intercom crackled to life, Dreyfus's voice cutting through the engine room like a knife. "Commander, you might want to get up here. We've got company." Mithra exchanged a glance with Arden, both understanding the stakes without needing to speak. They made their way back to the control room, the ship's battered corridors a blur in their urgency. "What is it?" Mithra demanded as they burst into the room, the tension in the air sharp enough to cut. Dreyfus gestured to the viewport where a line of Zorath ships hung against the black, an ominous presence that sent a chill down Mithra's spine. Party crashers, and they brought a whole marching band. Fantastic, Mithra muttered, her mind already racing through the limited possibilities. Are they hailing us? Not yet, Arden replied, fingers flying over the console. But I think we can safely assume they're not here to exchange pleasantries. Mithra stared out at the enemy ships, their sleek forms a stark contrast to the Vigilant's battered hull. It was like looking at a pack of wolves circling an injured animal, waiting for the moment to strike. Options? Mithra asked, though she already knew the answer was limited at best. Fight or flight, and flight isn't looking too good, Dreyfus said, his tone laced with grim humor. Unless you've got a secret weapon stashed somewhere. Mithra's gaze flicked to the console, where the superlacer's charge count ticked slowly upward. We might be able to take a few with us, she said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. Well, they do say misery loves company, Dreyfus replied, his eyes on the Zorath ships like a predator assessing its prey. Let's see what they want, Mithra decided, taking a breath to steady herself. Arden opened a channel, the screen flickered, and the face of a Zorath commander filled the space, his features cold and unyielding. Vigilant, he sneered, the word dripping with disdain. Surrender and we may grant you a swift end. Mithra met his gaze, unflinching. Afraid we're fresh out of white flags, she replied, her voice steady. You want us. Come and get us. The Zorath commander's lips curled into a smile devoid of warmth. Very well, prepare to be annihilated. The screen went dark and Mithra turned to her crew, who were watching her with a mix of respect and resignation. All right, you heard the man, she said, her voice a rallying cry. Let's show them what a cornered rat can do. The Vigilant shuddered as it powered up for one last stand, the crew holding their breaths as the Zorath ships closed in. It was desperation, it was madness, but it was also all they had. As the first shots were fired, Mithra felt a strange serenity settle over her. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time, but they would fight to the last breath. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about standing when the universe expected you to fall. Mithra stared at the dark screen where the Zorath commander's face had just sneered its last condescending threat. There was a certain satisfaction in slamming the console shut on him, like closing a particularly annoying spam email. Yet the satisfaction was fleeting, like the last sip of terrible coffee. Well, that was an inspiring chat, Dreyfus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He flexed his busted arm gingerly, wincing as he did. I feel motivated to go out there and die for the cause. How about you? Mithra let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. About as motivated as a cat facing a bucket of water, she replied, her eyes drifting to the console where the superlacer's charge count ticked up at a snail's pace. But it's not over yet. Arden, ever the sharp-eyed realist, chimed in. We're sitting on a dead man's hand, Commander. Whatever magic trick you're hiding up your sleeve, now's the time to wave your wand. Mithra frowned, staring at the superlacer's readout like it might suddenly decide to perform miracles. Scribe, what's the full capability of this weapon? Any secrets you've been keeping from us? Scanning archives, Scribe responded, its voice as dry as old parchment. Warning, some data may be corrupted. Please wait, Dreyfus chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling. I guess even our AI is as put together as the rest of us. Misery loves company, Mithra muttered, trying to muster some optimism. It wasn't working. The control room was a mess, with wires hanging like cosmic entrails and panels flickering in a seizure of malfunction. The crew hustled around, patching leaks with the urgency of people who know their lives depend on it, which of course they did. Arden was back at the console, her fingers dancing across the keys as she searched for something, anything that could give them an edge. Come on, you ancient bucket of bolts, she muttered, coaxing the machine like a reluctant mule. Give us something. Scribe, Mithra prompted, her patience as thin as the air in a vacuum. A pause, and then Scribe's voice came back with all the cheer of a funeral dirge. Records indicate an experimental upgrade installed just prior to the fall of the Terran Empire. Probability of successful operation, undetermined. An experimental upgrade, Mithra asked, a glimmer of hope igniting somewhere beneath the layers of cynicism. What kind of upgrade? The superlaser may be capable of a focused burst with increased damage output, Scribe explained, but at the risk of catastrophic overload. Feels like we're already living in catastrophic overload, Dreyfus commented dryly. What's one more gamble? How's that for motivation? Mithra quipped, already feeling the gears turn in her head. We've been handed a gun that might just blow up in our faces, but also might take a few of them with it. Arden raised an eyebrow, her skepticism palpable. So we're pinning our hopes on a weapon that could fry us faster than a solar flare. Pretty much, Mithra said, grinning despite herself. But when has certainty ever been on our side? Never, Dreyfus agreed. But hey, at least it'll be a memorable way to go. They all shared a grim chuckle, the kind that only comes when you're staring death in the face and flipping it the bird. The crew set to work, preparing the superlaser for its potential last hurrah. As systems were rerouted and power was siphoned off from non-essential functions, goodbye, climate control. Hello, freezer burn, Mithra found herself at the helm, her mind a whirl of strategies and half-baked plans. The Zorath ships were hanging back, perhaps waiting for them to sweat a little more. Typical. Scribe, give me a tactical readout, Mithra ordered. I want to know exactly what we're up against. Tactical analysis. Zorath fleet consists of 3 cruisers and 5 fighters, Scribe relayed. Cruisers equipped with advanced shielding and weaponry. Fighters are agile but lightly armed. So it's David versus Goliath with a side of Goliath's younger, faster cousins, Dreyfus said, shaking his head as he stared at the readout. David had a slingshot, Arden commented, adjusting the targeting system with a scowl. We've got a potentially suicidal superlaser. I guess we're upgrading. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Mithra said, more for her own benefit than anyone else's. As they worked, the tension in the control room was as thick as the dust in the corners, another testament to their long, unappreciated slumber. But there was something else, too. A sense of unity, a feeling that if they were going to go out, at least they'd go out together. Power diversion complete, Arden reported, her hands dancing over the controls like a maestro of doom. All non-essential systems offline. We're ready when you are, Commander. Mithra nodded, her gaze fixed on the viewport where the Zorath fleet loomed like a bad dream. Then let's not keep them waiting. Dreyfus, how's that arm holding up? Feels like it's attached with spit and prayer, he replied, flexing it cautiously. But it'll do. Besides, I never liked going out quietly. Mithra smirked, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like an old, familiar coat. All right, crew. Let's see how much chaos we can cause before they figure out we're bluffing. The Vigilant shook as it powered up, the superlaser humming with a dangerous, exhilarating energy. Mithra could almost feel it vibrating through her bones, a promise of either salvation or annihilation. The Zorath ships began to move, sensing the change in their prey. Mithra watched them close in, her heart pounding in a syncopated rhythm with the ship's failing systems. Commander, they're locking weapons, Arden warned, her voice steady but urgent. Then let's make sure they regret it, Mithra replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. On my mark, Dreyfus. Ready and waiting, he said, his eyes alight with a mixture of fear and excitement that mirrored her own feelings. 3, 2, 1. Fire! The superlaser roared to life, a blinding beam of energy lancing out from the Vigilant like the universe's angriest spotlight. It cut through the void with a precision that belied its unstable nature, striking the lead Zorath cruiser dead on. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the beam's impact a bright, searing line against the darkness. Then reality snapped back with a vengeance, the cruiser erupting in a brilliant cascade of destruction. Direct hit, Arden shouted, her voice a triumphant burst of sound in the tense silence. The cruiser's down, Mithra felt a surge of fierce satisfaction, a rare and precious victory. Damn right it is. Let's see how the rest of them like it. But before they could celebrate, the Vigilant shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the overloaded systems threatened to tear the ship apart from the inside. "Commander, we're losing power," Dreyfus yelled, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of warning sirens. "The overload's destabilizing the core. Shut it down," Mithra ordered, her heart in her throat as she struggled to keep the ship from tearing itself to pieces. "Scribe, emergency protocols. Initiating emergency shutdown," Scribe intoned, its usual monotony now tinged with urgency. Stabilizing systems. The Vigilant lurched, groaning like a wounded beast, but gradually the alarms fell silent, the ship's systems returning to some semblance of order. "Damage report," Mithra demanded, her voice hoarse as she assessed the situation. "Power levels critical but stable," Arden replied, her fingers flying over the console. "We've lost some secondary systems, but we're still in one piece." "One piece?" Mithra echoed, relief and exhaustion warring within her. "How about our friends out there?" Dreyfus checked the tactical display, his expression grim but determined. "They're moving in, but they've lost formation. We might have bought ourselves a little breathing room." Mithra nodded, her mind already racing with the next steps. "All right. Let's keep them guessing. We've got one shot left, and I intend to make it count." The crew nodded, their determination mirroring her own. They were battered, bruised, but not broken. "Not yet." "Scribe, how long until the superlacer's back online?" Mithra asked, watching the Zorath ships regrouping on the display. "Estimated time to readiness, 15 minutes, Scribe reported, its voice steady amidst the chaos. 15 minutes, Mithra repeated, a plan forming in her mind like a storm gathering on the horizon. "Then let's give them hell." The Vigilant turned, its engines barely holding together as they set course for the heart of the Zorath formation. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all they had left. "Commander, they're hailing us again," Arden said, her voice laced with equal parts surprise and wariness. Mithra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let's hear what they have to say." The screen flickered to life, revealing the Zorath commander once more, his expression a mask of controlled anger. "Vigilant, your defiance is commendable if futile. Surrender now and perhaps we will show mercy." Mithra met his gaze, her own resolve unyielding. "Funny, I was about to make you the same offer." The commander's eyes narrowed, his lips curling in disdain. "Then prepare to be destroyed. This is your last warning." "Do your worst," Mithra replied, her words a challenge and a promise. She cut the transmission, turning back to her crew with renewed determination. "We're in this to the end. Let's make it count." The Vigilant surged forward, a battered warrior charging into the fray with nothing left to lose. The Zorath ships moved to intercept, their weapons primed and ready. "Ready weapons," Mithra commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "And aim for the biggest bastard out there." Dreyfus grinned, his busted arm forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment. "Been waiting for this." As the distance closed, the battle was set to reach its fever pitch. The Vigilant was outnumbered and outgunned, but not out of fight. Not yet. "Superlacer charging," Arden reported, her eyes fixed on the display. "Ready on your command." Mithra took a deep breath, her mind clear and focused. This was it, their last stand, their final gamble. She would not go quietly into the night. "Fire," she ordered, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. The Superlacer fired once more, its beam a streak of defiance across the void. The Zorath fleet braced for impact, but Mithra knew, even in those final moments, that they'd made their mark. As the Vigilant hurtled toward its fate, Mithra felt a sense of peace amidst the chaos. They had fought, they had defied the odds, and they had done it together. And whatever came next, they would face it as a crew united, against a galaxy that had written them off. The stars blurred, the Zorath ships loomed, and the Vigilant roared into battle, a testament to human spirit and sheer, stubborn will. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The Zorath fleet was closing in like a pack of wolves, and there was nothing quite like the prospect of imminent death to sharpen the senses. The Vigilant creaked and groaned, the old girl barely holding together, but still she fought on. Mithra stood at the helm, a gladiator in the ring, staring down a monster with nothing but a rusty blade and an attitude problem. "Arden, what's our status on that superlaser?" Mithra barked, her eyes locked onto the swarm of ships on the display. Each blip felt like a personal insult. "Charged and ready to ruin someone's day," Arden replied, her fingers skating over the console with the ease of a pianist playing a particularly violent concerto. "Although I'd prefer if it wasn't yours." Noted. "Dreyfus, are you still breathing back there?" Mithra asked, her tone as dry as a desert wind. "Last I checked," Dreyfus grunted, his arm slung in a makeshift sling that looked like it had seen better days, much like the rest of them. "Though I'm not entirely sure that counts as a blessing." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room, the kind that only came when your odds of survival were about as favorable as a snowball's chance in hell. Mithra wasn't sure if it was bravery or stupidity, but either way they were committed now. "Scribe, initiate the jamming sequence," Mithra ordered, her mind whirring like the engine of a car clinging to its last cylinder. The Zorath loved their tech, and if there was anything humans excelled at, it was screwing with it. "Jamming sequence initiated," Scribe replied, its voice as emotionless as ever, like a robot that had just accepted its lot in life as a glorified radio. The Vigilant systems hummed with effort, sending out waves meant to disrupt the Zorath's delicate tech balance like a mischievous kid knocking over a house of cards. The effects were almost immediate. The Zorath ships began to stutter and jerk, their formations faltering. "Looks like they're having a bad connection," Dreyfus noted, a sardonic grin stretching his lips. "Someone ought to tell them to switch to another provider." "Let's hope they don't have a backup plan," Mithra said, though the hope was a slim thread they all clung to. The Zorath might have the advantage in tech, but humans had centuries of experience in making do with what they had, namely, not much. The Zorath's confusion was a beautiful chaos on the screens. Ships collided, their sleek forms turning into ungainly beasts as their systems went haywire. It was a mess only a mother, or in this case, an antagonistic species, could love. "Arden, target the biggest one," Mithra commanded, her voice steady. "Let's see if we can make them reconsider their career choices." "You got it, boss," Arden replied, her focus as sharp as a laser's edge. She lined up the shot, her breath held in anticipation. The control room was silent, save for the beeps and whirs of the consoles. "Fire," Mithra said, the word falling from her lips like a judge's gavel. The superlaser roared to life with a fury that was almost sentient, its beam slicing through the void like a hot knife through butter. It struck the largest cruiser with pinpoint accuracy, and for a heartbeat, the universe held its breath. Then the cruiser erupted in a dazzling explosion, debris scattering in all directions like confetti at a particularly grim celebration. The sight was both horrifying and beautiful, a testament to the destructive power they wielded with reckless abandon. "Direct hit," Arden confirmed, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that was hard to miss. "That should give them something to think about." The remaining Zorath ships scattered, their formation shattered like a bad dream upon waking. Mithra allowed herself a moment to breathe, her relief tempered by the knowledge that it wasn't over yet. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned, her gaze sweeping the room. "We still have friends out there who want to skin us alive." "We'll just have to disappoint them," Dreyfus said, his humor as dark as the space around them. "Wouldn't be the first time I've let someone down." The Vigilant maneuvered through the debris field, its engines straining against the wear of time. They were running on borrowed time and luck, but so far it was holding out. "Commander, they are regrouping," Arden reported, her fingers dancing across the console in a rhythm only she understood. "Looks like they're trying to shake off the jamming." "Let them try," Mithra replied, a feral grin on her face. "We'll just have to keep them off balance." The Zorath ships were swarming again, their tactics a mix of desperation and fury. It was like watching sharks circling a bleeding wound, and they were the seals caught in the middle. "We're gonna need a miracle," Dreyfus muttered, his eyes glued to the tactical display. "No, what we need is to screw up their day a little more," Mithra corrected, her tone firm. "Arden, prepare another shot. Let's see if we can make them rethink their life choices." "With pleasure," Arden replied, her focus unyielding, charging the superlaser. The Vigilant system strained under the demand, the ship quivering like it was caught in the throes of a fever dream. But still it held, a testament to its stubbornness and the crew's sheer force of will. The Zorath ships were closing in, their weapons charged and ready to deliver the killing blow. But the Vigilant had one more trick up its sleeve, and Mithra intended to use it. "Scribe, divert all remaining power to weapons," Mithra ordered, her voice tight with anticipation. "Power diverted," Scribe confirmed, its tone unruffled in the face of their impending doom. "Fire," Mithra commanded, her heart pounding a frantic beat in her chest. The superlaser fired again, its beam a searing line of destruction that arced through space with deadly intent. It struck another cruiser, the impact so bright it left spots dancing in their vision. The cruiser disintegrated, its wreckage a chaotic dance of fire and metal. The other Zorath ships faltered, hesitation rippling through their ranks like a sudden tide. "They're pulling back," Arden announced, her voice charged with disbelief and triumph. "They're actually pulling back." Mithra couldn't believe it. Against all odds, they'd done it. They'd turned the tide, proven that even the most advanced technology could be undone by human grit and a little bit of chaos. "Don't celebrate just yet," Mithra cautioned, though her relief was palpable. They might be regrouping for another attack, but the Zorath ships were retreating, their formation breaking apart as they fled into the depths of space. It was a sight that sent a thrill of victory coursing through the control room, a feeling as rare and precious as gold. The crew let out a cheer, their voices a jubilant cacophony that filled the room with a warmth that had been absent for too long. Even Dreyfus managed a grin, his busted arm forgotten in the wake of their success. "Not bad for a bunch of relics, huh?" Dreyfus said, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "Not bad at all," Mithra agreed, her gaze sweeping over her crew with a fierce pride. "They'd done the impossible and they'd done it together." "Scribe, status report," Mithra requested, her focus shifting to the practicalities of their situation. "Power levels critically low," Scribe reported, its tone calm in the face of their precarious victory. "Engines and shields operating at minimal capacity. Recommend immediate repairs." Mithra nodded, her mind already racing ahead. They'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. They'd need to regroup, to lick their wounds and prepare for whatever the galaxy threw at them next. "Arden, get us out of here," Mithra ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos of her thoughts. "Let's find somewhere safe to make repairs." "On it, Commander," Arden replied, her hands moving with practiced efficiency over the controls. The Vigilant turned, its course set for a quiet corner of the galaxy where they could catch their breath. As the stars streamed past the viewport, Mithra allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor the victory they'd snatched from the jaws of defeat. It was a heady feeling, one that left her both exhilarated and exhausted. They'd faced the Zorath and they'd come out on top. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, the refusal to go quietly into the night. And as the Vigilant sailed into the unknown, battered but unbeaten, Mithra knew that whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human. To fight, to survive, and to laugh in the face of the universe's indifference. And that, Mithra thought with a wry smile, was worth every scar and every sacrifice. "Here's to the bastards who refuse to give up," she murmured, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to the stars. The crew echoed her sentiment, their voices a ragtag chorus of defiance and camaraderie. And as the Vigilant continued its journey, its crew a stubborn band of survivors, Mithra felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Because they were human, and that meant they still had a fighting chance. And in a universe that wanted them gone, that was victory enough. The Vigilant limped through the void like a grumpy old man trying to cross the street without his cane. In the aftermath of their peculiar victory, the ship's innards were an orchestra of groans, its systems a patchwork quilt of barely functioning relics. Mithra sat in her command chair, a throne of rust and questionable padding, contemplating just how lucky they had been not to have been vaporized into cosmic dust. "Anyone else feel like we just cheated death at a particularly sadistic game of chance?" Dreyfus asked, cradling his makeshift sling like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "Either that or the universe has a sick sense of humor," Mithra replied, running a hand through her hair. "I'd bet on both." The control room was a cacophony of activity, or as much activity as a half-dead ship could muster. Arden was hunched over her console, her fingers flying with the grace of a pianist, coaxing every ounce of performance out of the Vigilant's decrepit systems. Scribe, the ship's emotionless AI, stood in the corner silently, like an old librarian just waiting for someone to ask a stupid question. "Scribe, any signs of life from the Resistance?" Mithra asked, her voice laced with both desperation and hope. It felt like asking a magic 8-ball if it was going to rain tomorrow. "Scanning all known frequencies," Scribe replied, its tone unchanging, as if it couldn't care less if the Resistance was alive or had been turned into space mulch. "Signal detected. Patching through." The console crackled to life, a voice emerging from the static like a phoenix from the ashes. "This is Captain Voss of the Free People's Armada." "Who's out there?" Mithra leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat. "This is Commander Mithra of the Vigilant. We just gave the Zorath a bloody nose and could use a place to regroup." There was a pause, and then Voss's voice returned, infused with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Mithra, by all that's unlucky, you're a sight for sore sensors. We thought the Zorath had claimed you." "Not yet," Mithra said, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Turns out they're not big fans of surprise laser surgery." "Copy that," Voss replied, a hint of a chuckle in his words. "Sending coordinates now. We've got a safe harbor in the asteroid belt. Should be off the Zorath's radar." A holographic map flickered to life on Arden's console, displaying a series of coordinates nestled in the asteroid belt of Phaedra 9, notoriously known for its unpredictably violent space weather and equally violent inhabitants. "Got the coordinates," Arden confirmed, her voice all business. "Course plotted. Let's hope their welcome mat isn't booby-trapped," Dreyfus muttered, stretching his injured arm experimentally. "Wouldn't be the first time we've walked into a trap," Mithra said, a sardonic edge in her voice. "And if they are smart, they'll have learned from the last bunch that tried." "You mean the ones we turned into space debris," Arden said, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Those would be the ones," Mithra replied, leaning back in her chair. "Let's see if this Captain Voss is smart enough to know a lifeline when he sees one." The Vigilant altered course, its engines grumbling like an old dog reluctantly getting up from a nap. The ship's occupants settled into a tense silence, each lost in thoughts that ranged from hopeful to downright pessimistic. As they approached the coordinates, the asteroid belt loomed ahead, a jumbled mess of rocks and debris that looked like a cosmic toddler's toy box gone awry. The belt's natural chaos provided perfect cover, as long as you didn't mind the risk of being smashed to bits. "Entering the asteroid field," Arden announced, her hand steady on the controls. "Let's hope Voss isn't a mirage. If he is, we'll make sure to haunt him in the afterlife," Dreyfus said, peering at the asteroids like they might leap out and bite him. The Vigilant weaved through the field, dodging asteroids with careful precision. It wasn't long before they spotted a cluster of ships nestled in a particularly dense section of the belt, their forms blending seamlessly with the surrounding debris. "Looks like Voss wasn't jerking us around," Mithra said, her tension easing slightly as they received an incoming hail. "Vigilant, this is Voss again. Looks like you made it in one piece." "More or less," Mithra replied, eyeing the flickering control panels. "Mind if we dock? Our ship could use a bit of a breather." "Permission granted," Voss said, his voice carrying a note of camaraderie. "Welcome to the last bastion of sanity in this sector." The Vigilant docked with a groan of metal on metal, the crew disembarking onto Voss's ship with a mixture of relief and wariness. The interior was a stark contrast to the Vigilant's rusted and battered framework, clean, organized, and thankfully lacking in the smell of burnt wiring. Voss was waiting for them, a rugged man with a face that looked like it had seen one too many bar fights. His grin was wide, welcoming, and just a little bit mocking. "Mithra and her merry band of misfits, welcome to the Resistance. Glad to see someone still fighting the good fight," Mithra said, shaking Voss's hand. "We were beginning to think the Zorath had scared everyone into hiding." "Not everyone," Voss replied, leading them deeper into the ship. "We've been gathering forces, but it's been slow going. You showing up with a Zorath cruiser on your kill list. That'll light a fire under a lot of arses. Good, because I'm tired of playing the underdog in this intergalactic pissing contest," Mithra said, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. "What's the plan, Voss?" "We hit him where it hurts," Voss said, his eyes alight with a fire that spoke of both desperation and determination. "The Zorath have been lording over this sector for too long. It's time to remind them that humanity doesn't roll over and die." "Sounds like my kind of party," Dreyfus chimed in, his voice darkly amused. "Just point us at the dance floor. You'll get your chance," Voss promised, leading them into a war room filled with maps and charts detailing Zorath positions, supply lines, and weak points. "We've got a coordinated strike planned. With your help we can tip the scales." Mithra studied the maps, her mind already calculating risks and outcomes. "You've got yourself a deal, but let's be clear. We're not here to play hero, we're here to win." "Agreed," Voss said, nodding. "No one remembers the losers." Arden, who'd been silent, tapped a spot on the map. "Here, this supply station. It's crucial, right?" "Right," Voss confirmed. "It's a linchpin in their supply chain." "Then we take it out," Arden said, her voice carrying the cold certainty of a sniper lining up her shot. "And when they come to investigate, we hit them from behind." Voss grinned, a feral gleam in his eyes. "I like the way you think." "Just don't underestimate the Zorath," Mithra warned, her voice hard. "They are as cunning as they are brutal, and we're as tenacious as we are stubborn," Voss countered, his grin undiminished. "They may have tech, but we've got grit," Dreyfus chuckled, "and a bone to pick." They spent the next few hours hammering out the details, refining plans until they were as sharp as any blade Mithra had wielded in her gladiator days. They spoke of ambushes and feints, of calculated chaos meant to bleed the Zorath dry. As they discussed, the crew of the Vigilant found themselves buoyed by the camaraderie and the shared purpose. It was intoxicating, this hope, fragile and fierce like a candle in a hurricane. Finally, as the plan solidified, Voss raised a hand. "To the Resistance," he said, toasting with a mug of something that smelled like industrial cleaner. "To the bastards who refuse to give up," Mithra echoed, lifting her own mug with a quirk of her lips. The room was filled with the sound of clinking mugs and voices raised in defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest times there was light to be found. As the crew prepared for the coming battle, the Vigilant's battered hull stood as a testament, not to the scars of defeat but to the resilience of its crew. They were relics, perhaps, but they were not forgotten, and they would not be silenced. In the grand theater of the galaxy, they would fight, because that was what it meant to be human. To rise, to resist, and to laugh in the face of the universe, because really what else was there left to do? And as they set their sights on the Zorath, they knew one thing for certain: this was far from over. But then, that's what made it worth it.